we're going to go back to Paris before we end today's class. But while we're in New York, we're going to actually go to the northern Manhattan neighborhood of Harlem, talk about James VanDerZee, you see in a self-portrait here. And this man is living the life. He's got his pipe, his newspaper, and his cat. Yeah, those are goals to live for, right? And he is an immensely successful photographer, probably the most successful photographer in Harlem, in this neighborhood in northern Manhattan. And he is, interesting life story here. He's originally from Massachusetts. He originally, when he moved to New York, he was still, he was already, 20 years old. He planned to go into music. He was a really accomplished violinist and was planning to go into a career in music. But then he won a camera in some kind of contest when he was still a teenager. So he'd been experimenting with photography, actually going back to the 1880s, even before he moved to New York. And then he moved to New York in 1906, again, still thinking he's going to be a professional musician when he's 20 years old. But then he begins working in a photo studio in Harlem and decides at some point, I don't know if he had just failures at a career in music or just decided, hey, photography was where his heart really lied, that he decided to go into photography instead. And he ends up opening the studio in Harlem on 135th Street. And it was called the Guarantee Photo Studio, the studio that he was operating. And he would, this was a photo studio, like any other studio, where people would come to get their portraits made. So a lot of the people you see in VanDerZee's photographs, we don't know the names for. There's a few famous people, including people who would be, some musicians and performers from Harlem during the 30s, 1920s and 30s. And, but a lot of these people would come to a studio to get their image taken. And this is really part of what's called the Harlem Renaissance. And you probably studied the Harlem Renaissance in literature classes, but there's also a strong visual arts component to the Harlem Renaissance. And which is just as important because it provides us with the visuals for the individuals and both artists and singers like Grace Brooke here, and also ordinary, everyday people, many of whose names we don't have recorded, but they appear in VanDerZee's photographs as individuals who are they're from families who have moved to New York, probably within that same generation. This is a time really of the Southern migration, where you have a lot of African Americans moving from the South into cities in the North, and in New York, the neighborhood of Harlem, of course, becomes a major kind of like cultural magnet for African Americans who have left the South. And we have here this black neighborhood that is making art and theater and business, every side of life, and homes for themselves. And it's such a vibrant time that we know as the Harlem Renaissance because of just how much art and literature came out of this time. Again, 1920s and 30s is the time we're really talking about here. And some of you will know this already, again, if you studied Harlem Renaissance literature, but what was so distinctive about the Harlem Renaissance is that we have black Americans making images of themselves for themselves. Most in popular culture, at least in kind of the American culture before the Harlem Renaissance, a lot of the images we would have of black Americans were made by white people, and they would often represent black people either as helpless victims, or as villains, or as ridiculous caricatures, like from the minstrel show. And instead of that, we have images that VanDerZee and other Harlem artists are making of Black Americans who are in control of their own agency, right? They're not, caricatures, whether, positive or negative caricatures. These are real people who, again, are in charge of their own destinies and living and making art and making businesses and things like that for their neighborhood and for the world in general. Again, most of the photographs you'll find coming out of the Guarantee Photo Studio that Abbott was running were ordinary private citizens, like the man on the right here, who's enlisted currently in the Army, 1944, soldier, but we don't have his name. Although you'll often see VanDerZee's signature, as the photographer. There are some, again, famous individuals, not only musicians and singers, but also political activists. I don't know if you are familiar with Marcus Garvey. He's an interesting character from the Harlem Renaissance. He's the guy on the right in this group photograph here. He he was the head of the UNIACL, this organization. And in 1920, Garvey had declared himself to be the provisional president of Africa. Like, Africa. I don't think there was any political legitimacy, no way to, back up that claim. But here he is with Prince Kojo Tavalo Unenu and a friend of theirs, George Markey. But yeah, these are interesting individuals. Marcus Garvey especially is a fascinating kind of character in the 1920s. So just like Auger in Paris or Abbott in downtown and midtown New York, VanDerZee will capture the sights and shops of Harlem in northern Manhattan. So we have the bars and restaurants like this. Also use of this queue of people in, I think this be his photo studio where you get your passport photos taken. Now I want to show you probably the most famous photograph by VanDerZee, and actually one of the most famous photographs or images in general to come out of the Harlem Renaissance. You don't know the names of these individuals. Again, private citizens. But this is the photograph of a couple in raccoon coats. Have you guys seen this photograph before? Again, we don't know their names, but what we can deduce from their attire and their vehicle, these individuals are very well off. They are wearing the height of fashion, the raccoon coats of the 1920s and 30s. This is what every really hip, fashionable person would wear, a raccoon coat. And these are full-length raccoon coats. They're him and her coats too. I'm going to zoom in on the couple here. If you look carefully, the collars are different. So she's wearing the fuller collar of a woman's raccoon coat, and he's wearing the smaller collar of a man's raccoon coat. But full-length raccoon coats. Again, white and black Americans were obsessed with raccoon coats in the 20s and 30s. So they're really, wearing what would have been the latest kind of cutting-edge fashion here. And then there's that car. Actually, I'm going to show you another photograph from the same photo shoot. This is slightly different. It's a different image. You can see the man is leaning over a little more in this image. But obviously from the same photo shoot where you see more of the car and the buildings in the background here. That's not just any car. That's a Cadillac V16. Only 4,000 of these were ever made. You had to sign up to get one. And you would get like, you know, it would be like a custom-made vehicle. And the fact that this man and woman, presumably a married couple, you know, but we don't know for sure, but that they owned this vehicle. I mean, that's the implication. Again, we'll deduce here. With the coats they're wearing, we would believe that they must be the owners of this beautiful car, which is a convertible two-seater roadster. That's the kind of vehicle we're dealing with here. Look at the chrome. Look at there's also a, you know, luggage rack in the back there. And before the 1930s, Black Americans could not directly purchase Cadillacs. Cadillacs, they would only, General Motors, who, you know, the company that produced Cadillacs, would only sell directly to white purchasers. So Black Americans, until the 1930s, would have to go through an intermediary. They'd have to hire like a white guy to be like the dealer from whom they could then, you know, secondhand kind of buy the car. But in the 1930s, General Motors has realized there's a major market here that we're missing out on of Black Americans, including like, you know, like this couple in Harlem who have the money to buy their own Cadillac, and a Cadillac V16 of all models, incredible, that they began then selling directly to Black Americans, like this couple. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not a big car person. Now, some of you might have somebody in your family, or maybe some of you are big car people, so, you know, you might appreciate the Cadillac V16 more than I do here. But what I've learned about it is, there's no other way to put it, this is a sweet ride. A beautiful car, again, very limited edition. So, an expensive vehicle, rare. So if you got one, that was a status statement. If you owned one of these vehicles, so the same model you see here, the V16, 16-cylinder engine. Okay, how many of you drive a 16-cylinder engine-powered car? I drive a Nissan Versa. It's a 4-cylinder car. The most cylinders I've ever driven is a 6-cylinder car. I can't imagine driving a 16-cylinder. That must be incredible, you know? And again, I'm not a car person, but even I feel like I would love to take a ride in one of these. Get it behind the wheel, you know, hit the road, you know, pull the top down on a nice day. What a life, yeah. The other clue about where we are, like we have all these kind of like status symbols expressed through the, again, full-length raccoon coats and the Cadillac that they are in and standing next to. But we also know we are in Harlem because the brownstones in the background there actually identify a specific street in Harlem. It's West 127th Street. Is up here. And here we are. So we've been in Midtown Manhattan. We've also been all the way down to the terminus where Stieglitz was shooting the terminal image there. Remember that streetcar, that line of streetcars that Stieglitz was taking photographs of down at the terminal in downtown Manhattan was the streetcar that would run up to Harlem. So we're in Harlem now. Specifically, we're here. Oh, look, there's VanDerZee here. Now, unfortunately, I cannot show you the same brownstones today, but there are many of these brownstones still standing in all these neighborhoods of Manhattan, including Harlem, like the one on the right here. It's one of these brownstones that still survives in Harlem to this day. Yeah, there's something about these. I know, it's become kind of a cliche, right? It's like you want to move to New York and live in a brownstone, and nobody can usually afford to, but, you know, they're beautiful old buildings. The stairs, the stoops, the downstairs, just really cool buildings. But you can tell in the background, at least in the larger, broader view of VanDerZee's image, you can make out the numbers, street address here, and if you look up these street numbers on Google Maps today, from 244 to 246 on West 127th Street, it's not this building, it's where this building is now is where those structures used to stand. And this is, so at some point, the buildings you see in the background of the VanDerZee photograph were demolished and then replaced at some point with a public school. So you see a school building there today. But right next door, there is still a brownstone. It's not in the best shape. Somebody needs to like really do some major renovations of this building. But it's still standing, so you can get an idea. Like if you want to recreate this photograph, okay, first of all, you gotta get authentic raccoon coats, vintage if you can. You gotta get your hands on one of these Cadillacs, and then send me your photograph of yourself parked outside of this building, because this is, again, next to, you see the public school over here, you know, it's right next to where that, those brownstones in the VanDerZee photograph would have stood. And it gives you a little bit of an idea of what it would have been like still today. Although again, this particular row of buildings is in bad shape. This is a photograph from, I think, 2019 on Google Maps. And I went back to look up, and it's still, those brownstones are still standing, but they're still in pretty dilapidated state. So somebody needs to fix these up. So if you can afford the raccoon coats and the Cadillac, then hey, property development opportunity maybe? I don't know. I don't know who owns this building.